My grandmother used to say, "The deepest wounds are the ones nobody sees, but they shape us more than any scar on the surface." I never understood those words until I found myself standing in an empty nursery, my heart shattered into pieces while my family celebrated downstairs. I'm Sarah Mitchell, and this is the story of how I went from being the family disappointment whose pain didn't matter to watching my relatives' perfect world crumble when they opened a simple cardboard box that revealed everything they'd chosen to ignore. The cramping started on a Tuesday morning in October, just as the autumn leaves were beginning their final dance outside my bedroom window in Cedar Falls, Iowa. I was 14 weeks along, finally past what the doctors call the danger zone, finally ready to start telling people about the miracle growing inside me. My husband Marcus had left early for his construction job, kissing my still flat belly and whispering promises to our unborn child like he did every morning. The house felt unusually quiet that day, as if even the walls knew something was about to change forever. I'd been trying to conceive for 3 years. 3 long years of negative pregnancy tests, fertility treatments that drained our savings, and well-meaning relatives asking when we were going to give them a grandchild at every family gathering. When I finally saw those 2 pink lines last July, I cried in that tiny bathroom for 20 minutes, clutching the test like it was made of gold. Marcus found me there, and we held each other and planned our future around this tiny miracle we'd waited so long to receive. The bleeding started slowly, just a few drops that I tried to convince myself meant nothing. Dr. Patterson had warned me that some spotting was normal, that my body was just adjusting. But deep down, in that place where mother's intuition lives, I knew. I knew with a certainty that made my knees weak and my hands shake as I dialed Marcus's number with trembling fingers. He dropped everything and raced home, finding me curled, up on our bathroom floor, sobbing words that didn't make sense between gasps for air. The emergency room at Cedar Falls General was sterile and cold, filled with the kind of fluorescent lighting that makes everything look harsh and unforgiving. I remember gripping Marcus's hand so tightly that his wedding ring left marks on my palm while we waited for the ultrasound technician to find what we both desperately hoped was still there. The silence in that darkened room stretched on forever, broken only by the mechanical whirring of equipment and the sound of my own ragged breathing. When the technician finally spoke, her voice was gentle but final. "I'm so sorry. There's no heartbeat." The world stopped. Everything I'd dreamed about, planned for, hoped for, disappeared in an instant. The nursery we'd started painting pale, yellow because we wanted to be surprised. The tiny clothes I'd already begun collecting, tucked away in a dresser drawer like precious secrets. The names we'd whispered to each other late at night, testing how they sounded, imagining calling them across playgrounds and at graduation ceremonies. All of it, gone. What happened next was called a D&C, a clinical term for a procedure that would remove what was left of my hopes and dreams. The doctor explained it matter-of-factly, using words like tissue and procedure, while I nodded numbly, signing forms that authorized them to take away the last physical connection I had to the child I'd never hold. Marcus held my hand through it all, his own eyes red with unshed tears, whispering that we'd get through this together, that we'd try again when I was ready. But the physical healing was nothing compared to the emotional devastation that followed. I took a week off from my job at the local insurance office, spending my days in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of a world that had suddenly become foreign and cruel. Marcus brought me soup I couldn't eat, and tea that grew cold while I tried to find words for a grief that had no name. How do you mourn someone you never met? How do you explain the depth of love for a person who existed only in your heart and dreams? The worst part wasn't the physical pain or even the emotional agony. It was the silence. The deafening, suffocating silence from the people who should have wrapped me in love and understanding. When I finally worked up the courage to call my mother Patricia, her response was a distracted, "Oh, honey, I'm sorry. followed immediately by an excited launch into plans for my cousin Jessica's engagement party. When I tried to explain how devastated I was, how I couldn't imagine celebrating anything right now, she brushed off my concerns with a casual, "Well, these things happen for a reason. You're young, you'll have other chances." Other chances. As if the child I'd lost was as replaceable as a broken dish or a missed opportunity. As if the love I'd already felt, the connection I'd already formed, the future I'd already planned meant nothing because it hadn't resulted in a living, breathing baby I could show off at family gatherings. My sister Rebecca was even worse. When I called her through tears, explaining what had happened, she was clearly distracted, probably scrolling through her phone while I poured out my heart. "That sucks, Sarah," she said with all the sympathy of someone commenting on bad weather. "Listen, I'm super busy planning Jessica's party. Mom put me in charge of decorations and I'm totally overwhelmed. Can we talk about this later?" There was no later. She never called back. Even my father, usually the more sensitive of my parents, seemed uncomfortable with my grief. When I visited their house the following weekend, hoping for comfort and understanding, he patted my shoulder awkwardly and said, "These things happen, sweetheart. Your mother and I lost one too, back before you were born. You just have to move forward." Move forward. As if grief had a timeline, as if there was a schedule I was supposed to follow that would take me from devastation to acceptance in some predetermined number of days. But it was my brother Daniel's response that cut the deepest. When I finally told him what had happened, his exact words were, "Well, at least you know you can get pregnant now. That's something positive, right?" Positive. He found something positive in the loss of my child, as if the ability to conceive was more important than the baby I'd lost. As if my pain was an overreaction to what he clearly saw as a minor setback on the road to eventual parenthood. The loneliness was overwhelming. Marcus did his best, but he was grieving too, in his own quiet way, and I could see the helplessness in his eyes when he looked at me. He didn't know how to fix this, how to make it better, and his frustration with my continued sadness began to show in small ways. The way he'd sigh when he came home to find me still in bed, still crying. The way he'd suggest I get out of the house or try to think about something else, as if grief was a choice I was making rather than something that lived inside me like a physical weight. Work became unbearable. My colleagues who'd known about the pregnancy offered awkward condolences that felt more like obligations than genuine sympathy. "At least it was early," one said, as if the timing made the loss less significant. "Everything happens for a reason," another added, unknowingly echoing my mother's dismissive words. They meant well, but their discomfort with my grief was palpable, and I found myself pretending to be better just to avoid their awkward attempts at comfort. The worst part was how quickly everyone expected me to return to normal. Within 2 weeks, my family was calling with updates about Jessica's engagement party, assuming I'd moved on from what they clearly saw as a minor disappointment. My mother called to ask if I could help with the catering, chattering about flower arrangements and guest lists while I sat in my empty nursery, surrounded by the remnants of dreams that would never come true. That's when I realized something that would change everything. My family hadn't forgotten about my miscarriage. They'd simply decided it wasn't important enough to interfere with their celebration. They'd made a conscious choice to prioritize a party over their daughters, sisters, and sister-in-law's deepest pain. They'd looked at my shattered heart and decided it was less significant than centerpieces and party favors. The engagement party was scheduled for the exact date that would have been my due date. March 15th, the day I should have been holding my baby, counting tiny fingers and toes, marveling at the miracle Marcus and I had created together. My family would instead be toasting Jessica's future while ignoring the future that had been stolen from me. The irony was so cruel it took my breath away. But as I sat in that nursery, surrounded by the evidence of my lost hopes, something shifted inside me. The grief was still there, would always be there, but alongside it grew something else. A fierce determination to make them understand what they'd chosen to ignore, to show them, in terms they couldn't dismiss or minimize, exactly what their silence and indifference had cost. I'd been invisible to them in my pain, dismissed in my grief, forgotten in my healing. But I was about to become unforgettable in my truth. Sometimes the quietest people make the loudest statements, and I was done being quiet about the child they'd pretended never existed. The box I would send them would contain more than objects. It would hold the weight of every dismissive comment, every awkward silence, every time they'd chosen celebration over compassion. And when they opened it, they'd finally understand that some losses demand to be acknowledged, some pain refuses to be ignored, and some truths are too powerful to be buried beneath the shallow soil of social expectations. Growing up in Cedar Falls meant knowing everyone's business and having everyone know yours. At least that's what I thought until I learned how invisible genuine pain could be in a town that prized appearances above authenticity. The Mitchell family had deep roots in this Iowa soil, dating back 4 generations to when my great-great-grandfather established the first grain elevator that still stands on the edge of downtown. Our family name meant something here, carved into the cornerstone of the community center and etched on a plaque at the entrance to Mitchell Park, where summer concerts filled warm evenings with music and laughter. My childhood was spent in the shadow of expectations, learning early that Mitchell women were supposed to be strong, resilient, and above all, successful in the traditional ways that small-town society measured worth. My mother Patricia had been homecoming queen in 1978, captain of the debate team, and graduated valedictorian before marrying my father and settling into the role of perfect small-town matriarch. She ran the historical society, organized charity, drives, and could coordinate a church fundraiser with military precision, while maintaining the kind of smile that graced the social pages of the Cedar Falls Gazette. My father, Robert Mitchell, owned Mitchell Hardware, the store his father had built from nothing after returning from Korea. Walking into that store was like stepping back in time, with its wooden floors that creaked in all the right places and walls lined with tools and supplies that could fix anything broken. Dad knew every customer by name, remembered their children's birthdays, and extended credit to families going through hard times without ever making them feel like charity cases. He was the kind of man who measured success not in dollars, but in the number of problems he'd helped solve and neighbors he'd helped when they needed it most. My siblings and I were raised with the understanding that we represented more than just ourselves. Rebecca, 3 years older than me, embraced this responsibility with enthusiasm that bordered on obsession. She was student council president, prom queen, married her high school sweetheart right after graduating from the University of Iowa, and settled into a picture-perfect life in the historic district, with 2 beautiful children and a husband who coached Little League. Rebecca's house looked like it belonged in a magazine, with seasonal decorations that appeared precisely on schedule, and dinner parties that became the standard by which other social gatherings were measured. Daniel, my younger brother by 2 years, followed a different but equally approved path. Star quarterback in high school, full scholarship to Iowa State, and now a successful insurance agent with his own agency in downtown Cedar Falls. He married Amanda, a nurse from the next town over, and they lived in a sprawling new house on the outskirts of town with their twin boys and a golden retriever named Buddy. Daniel's success was measured in visible markers: the size of his house, the newness of his truck, the number of youth sports teams he sponsored through his business. Then there was me, Sarah, the middle child who somehow never quite fit the Mitchell mold despite my best efforts. I wasn't homecoming queen material, like Rebecca, with her effortless blonde beauty and natural charisma. I wasn't athletic like Daniel, who seemed to excel at every sport he touched. Instead, I was the bookish one, the quiet one, the one who preferred reading in corners to performing on stages. I graduated with good grades but not spectacular ones, went to the local community college for my associate degree instead of a prestigious university, and took a job at Hartley Insurance because it was stable and allowed me to stay close to home. My choice to marry Marcus was the first real decision that disappointed my family, though they tried to hide it behind polite smiles and careful words. Marcus Sullivan wasn't from Cedar Falls originally, having moved here from Chicago after his father died, and his mother wanted to be closer to her sister. He was a carpenter and construction worker, building houses and fixing roofs with hands that were permanently stained with honest work and calloused from tools rather than keyboards. He didn't have a college degree or family money or connections that could advance his social standing, but he had something more valuable to me: a genuine heart and the kind of integrity that couldn't be taught or faked. When we started dating, I could see the questions in my mother's eyes and hear the careful way my father would ask about Marcus's plans for the future. Rebecca was more direct, wondering aloud why I was settling for someone who would never be able to provide the kind of lifestyle she thought I deserved. Daniel was skeptical too, questioning whether Marcus was ambitious enough to be a good match for a Mitchell. But Marcus won me over, not with grand gestures or expensive gifts, but with the way he listened when I talked, the way he remembered small details about my day, and the way he looked at me like I was exactly what he'd been searching for his whole life. Our wedding was beautiful but modest, held in the same church where my parents had married and my grandparents before them. Marcus looked handsome in his simple black suit, and I felt radiant in a dress I'd found on sale at a bridal shop in Waterloo. The reception was in the church basement, decorated with flowers from my mother's garden, and food prepared by the church ladies who'd known me since I was in diapers. It wasn't the elaborate affair Rebecca had orchestrated for herself, but it was perfect for us, filled with people who genuinely cared about our happiness rather than the social significance of the event. We bought a small house on Elm Street, a 1940s bungalow that needed work but had good bones and a big backyard, perfect for the children we dreamed of having. Marcus spent weekends renovating, teaching me how to tile bathrooms and paint trim while we planned our future room by room. The spare bedroom became our project room first, then our office, but we both knew what it would eventually become. We'd stand in that doorway sometimes, envisioning cribs and rocking chairs, planning where we'd put the changing table and how we'd arrange the furniture to catch the morning light. My job at Hartley Insurance was exactly the kind of steady, predictable work that my family approved of, even if they thought I should have aimed higher. I processed claims, answered phones, and helped local families navigate the complexities of coverage and deductibles. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was meaningful in small ways, helping people rebuild after storms and accidents, providing financial security when disasters struck. I was good at it too, patient with confused customers and thorough with paperwork, earning the trust of both my boss and the clients who specifically requested to work with me. Marcus and I settled into a comfortable rhythm during our first 2 years of marriage. He'd leave for work sites before dawn, and I'd have coffee ready when he got home, dirt under his fingernails and satisfaction in his eyes from a day spent building something solid and lasting. We'd sit on our front porch in the evenings, watching neighbors walk their dogs and planning the improvements we'd make to our house and our life together. Everything felt possible then, our future stretching out before us like a blank canvas waiting to be painted with all the colors of our dreams. The only shadow on our happiness was the absence of children. We'd started trying right after our honeymoon, full of excitement and confidence that pregnancy would happen quickly and easily. When months passed without success, we remained optimistic, telling ourselves that timing was everything and that our baby would come when it was meant to. But as the first year turned into the second and negative pregnancy tests accumulated like small defeats, the subject became more sensitive, more fraught with disappointment and unspoken fears. Family gatherings became minefields of well-meaning, questions and painful reminders of what we didn't have. Rebecca's children, adorable and precocious, served as constant evidence of what seemed to come so naturally to everyone else. Daniel and Amanda announced their pregnancy at my father's birthday dinner, and I had to excuse myself to cry in the bathroom while everyone else celebrated the expansion of the family tree. My mother started making pointed comments about how nice it would be to have more grandchildren, while my father would pat Marcus on the back and make jokes about getting busy that made us both want to disappear. The fertility treatments began in our third year of marriage, a journey into the medical complexities of conception that transformed the most intimate aspects of our relationship into clinical procedures scheduled around ovulation charts and hormone injections. Dr. Patterson at the Cedar Falls clinic was kind but direct, explaining the various interventions available while carefully managing our expectations. The process was expensive, emotionally draining, and intrusive in ways that tested our marriage and our resolve. Marcus worked extra jobs to pay for the treatments, taking on weekend projects and side work that kept him busy, but brought in the additional income we needed. I tracked every symptom, every temperature fluctuation, every sign that might indicate success, turning our bedroom into a makeshift laboratory of hope and desperation. The monthly cycle of anticipation and disappointment became its own kind of torture, each negative test result feeling like a personal failure that I carried in my chest like a stone. My family's response to our fertility struggles revealed the depths of their discomfort with anything that couldn't be fixed with determination and positive thinking. My mother offered advice gleaned from magazines and friends, suggesting everything from special diets to stress reduction techniques as if we simply weren't trying hard enough. Rebecca shared stories of friends who'd gotten pregnant the moment they stopped thinking about it, as if our years of careful planning and medical intervention were somehow counterproductive. Daniel avoided the subject entirely, clearly uncomfortable with discussions of anything so personal and medical. But through it all, Marcus remained my anchor, the steady presence who held me when the treatments failed and celebrated with me when we achieved small victories along the way. He never made me feel like our inability to conceive was my fault, never suggested that maybe we should give up and accept a childless life. Instead, he researched treatments alongside me, held my hand during procedures, and maintained faith in our future even when mine wavered. When we finally saw those 2 pink lines after 3 years of trying, the joy was overwhelming and complicated, tinged with the fear that had become second nature after so many disappointments. We were cautious in our celebration, afraid to hope too much, afraid to plan too far ahead. But as the weeks passed and the pregnancy progressed normally, we began to believe that our patience and persistence had finally been rewarded with the miracle we'd waited so long to receive. The first sign that something was fundamentally different about how my family viewed success became apparent during Rebecca's housewarming party 3 years into my marriage with Marcus. Her new house in the Maple Ridge subdivision was everything Cedar Falls society considered aspirational, a sprawling 2-story colonial with white columns, manicured landscaping, and an interior that looked like it had been lifted from the pages of Better Homes and Gardens. Every detail had been carefully curated to project an image of prosperity and refined taste, from the marble countertops in the kitchen to the professionally decorated living room that no one was actually allowed to use. Rebecca floated through, her party like a queen holding court, accepting compliments on her decorating choices and discussing the various contractors and designers who had helped her achieve this vision of domestic perfection. She wore a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary, her hair professionally styled into the kind of effortless waves that actually required hours of preparation. Every gesture was calculated to project confidence and success, from the way she held her wine glass to the practiced laugh she deployed when someone complimented her taste. When Rebecca introduced me to her new neighbors and colleagues, the contrast between us was painful and deliberate. "This is my little sister Sarah," she would say with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "She works in insurance and lives in one of those charming old houses downtown." The word charming carried the weight of condescension, a polite way of saying small and outdated. When someone would ask about my work, Rebecca would quickly redirect the conversation back to her own recent promotion or the vacation she and Brad were planning to take the children on over spring break. The most cutting moment came when one of Rebecca's new neighbors, a woman with perfectly highlighted hair and designer handbag, asked if I had children. Before I could answer, Rebecca jumped in with a laugh that sounded like broken glass. "Oh, Sarah and Marcus are still working on that project," she said, as if our 3 years of fertility struggles were simply a matter of poor time management. You know how it is with some couples, they're just not as naturally fertile as others. The casual cruelty of reducing our pain to a punchline while surrounded by strangers left me speechless and humiliated. My mother stood nearby during this exchange, sipping her wine and nodding along as if Rebecca's words were perfectly reasonable, rather than devastatingly hurtful. When I caught her eye, hoping for some sign of disapproval or support, she simply shrugged and turned back to her conversation about the upcoming garden club fundraiser. The message was clear. My feelings were less important than maintaining social harmony, and calling out Rebecca's behavior would be more disruptive than allowing it to continue. Daniel's approach to family hierarchy was different, but equally dismissive. Where Rebecca used subtle condescension and social positioning to establish her superiority, Daniel relied on more direct forms of comparison that always seemed to highlight my failures to meet traditional markers of success. During family dinners at our parents' house, he would regale everyone with stories of his latest business achievements, the new clients he'd signed, the expensive purchases he'd made, the exclusive events he'd been invited to attend. His success in insurance wasn't just professional achievement to Daniel. It was proof of his superior judgment and work ethic. He would often make pointed comments about how important it was to think big and not settle for mediocrity, while looking directly at me across the dinner table. When I mentioned small victories at my own job, like helping a family navigate a complicated claim or receiving positive feedback from my supervisor, Daniel would nod politely before launching into stories about his own much larger accomplishments. The house Daniel and Amanda built on the outskirts of town was another instrument of comparison, a testament to his ability to provide in ways that Marcus apparently couldn't. Every family gathering seemed to include a tour of some new addition or improvement. The finished basement with its home theater system, the 3-car garage that housed his truck, Amanda's SUV, and his restored classic Camaro, the elaborate deck system he'd had built for entertaining. These tours were presented as generous sharing, but felt more like calculated demonstrations of the lifestyle gaps between us. Amanda, Daniel's wife, participated in this dynamic with the kind of sweet-faced meanness that was particularly hard to combat. She would ask about our house with exaggerated concern, wondering if we were comfortable in such a small space, and whether we'd considered upgrading to something more suitable for a growing family. When she learned that Marcus did most of our home repairs himself rather than hiring contractors, she would marvel at how handy he was, as if his skills were quaint rather than valuable, amateur rather than professional. The children, Daniel and Amanda's twin boys, became unwitting weapons in this ongoing campaign of superiority. Every family gathering showcased their latest achievements, their expensive sports equipment, their enrollment in exclusive programs and camps that required significant financial investment. My mother would fuss over these grandchildren with an intensity that highlighted the absence of my own contribution to the family legacy, asking detailed questions about their activities and accomplishments while displaying their artwork on her refrigerator like trophies. My father's participation in this dynamic was more subtle but equally painful. Robert Mitchell had built his reputation on being fair and supportive to everyone, but his version of fairness seemed to involve treating my smaller achievements with the same enthusiasm he showed for my siblings' larger ones, which somehow made my accomplishments feel even more inadequate. When Rebecca got promoted to senior marketing manager at the bank where she worked, Dad threw a celebration dinner and gave a toast about how proud he was of her professional success. When I received a small raise and additional responsibilities, at Hartley Insurance, he offered the same congratulations and even suggested we celebrate with dinner out, but the equivalence felt forced and patronizing. The most insidious aspect of this family dynamic was how it was wrapped in love and concern, rather than obvious hostility. My siblings weren't outright cruel or deliberately hurtful. They were simply establishing their positions in a hierarchy that placed traditional markers of success above the quieter satisfactions of a life lived on different terms. They genuinely believed they were helping me by pointing out areas where I could improve, motivating me to achieve more, encouraging me to want better things for myself and my marriage. Rebecca would often pull me aside at family events to offer advice about my career, suggesting that I should be more ambitious and consider pursuing additional education or training that would qualify me for higher-paying positions. She meant well, she insisted, but couldn't understand why I seemed content with such a limited professional trajectory when I clearly had the intelligence to do more. Her concern felt genuine, even as it dismissed everything I valued about my work and my choices. Daniel's version of helpfulness involved offering Marcus opportunities to work on projects for his friends and business associates, construction jobs that paid well, but came with the implicit understanding that Marcus was being done a favor rather than providing valuable services. He would present these opportunities with enthusiasm, explaining how much the work paid and what a great chance it was for Marcus to network with successful people who might lead to bigger opportunities. The subtext was always clear. Marcus needed Daniel's help to access the kind of work that really mattered. Even my parents participated in this well-meaning condescension, offering to help us with down payments on a larger house, or suggesting that maybe I should consider returning to school to get a bachelor's degree that would open more doors professionally. They framed these offers as expressions of love and support, ways to help us achieve the kind of stability and success they wanted for all their children. But underlying every offer was the assumption that our current life was insufficient, that we were somehow falling short of the standards they'd set for family success. The pregnancy announcement should have changed everything, should have finally given me something that would earn the kind of respect and celebration my siblings took for granted. When Marcus and I decided to share our news with the family, I imagined the moment would mark my entry into full membership in the family legacy, the beginning of my contribution to the next generation of Mitchells who would carry on the traditions and values that meant so much to my parents. We chose to announce at Sunday dinner, the weekly gathering that had been a Mitchell tradition since before I was born. My mother always cooked too much food and set the dining room table with her good china, creating a formal atmosphere that elevated the simple act of sharing a meal into something ceremonial. I wore a new dress for the occasion, something soft and feminine that I hoped would enhance the glow everyone said pregnant women were supposed to have. The timing felt perfect, the setting ideal for sharing news that would finally place Marcus and me on equal footing with Rebecca and Daniel. We'd rehearsed how we would tell them, planning to make the announcement after dessert when everyone was relaxed and happy. I imagined my mother's tears of joy, my father's proud smile, Rebecca and Daniel welcoming us into the club of parents, who truly understood the meaning of family responsibility and love. But the reaction wasn't what I'd expected. The initial excitement was genuine but brief, quickly overshadowed by practical concerns and comparisons that somehow managed to diminish our joy even in the moment of sharing it. My mother immediately began calculating due dates and planning schedules, worried about how the timing would affect various family events and obligations. Rebecca jumped into advice mode, sharing horror stories from her own pregnancies and listing all the things I would need to buy and do to prepare properly for motherhood. Daniel's response was the most deflating, a congratulations that immediately shifted into concerns about our readiness for the financial responsibilities of parenthood. He questioned whether we'd considered the costs of childcare, the need for a larger house, the importance of starting a college fund immediately. His intentions were probably good, but the effect was to transform our moment of joy into an anxiety-inducing inventory of our inadequacies and limitations. Even as they celebrated with us, I could see the calculations happening behind their eyes. the unconscious assessments of how this pregnancy fit into their understanding of proper timing and preparation. Rebecca had been married for 3 years before having her first child, with a stable career and a house large enough to accommodate a growing family. Daniel had waited even longer, establishing his business and building his dream house before starting a family. My pregnancy, coming after years of struggle and in the context of our more modest circumstances, felt premature to them, even though we were older than they'd been when they started their families. The seed of difference was planted in that moment, the subtle indication that even this most universal of accomplishments would be measured against their standards and found somehow lacking. I was pregnant, yes, but not in the right way, not with the right preparation, not with the right foundation of success and stability that they'd established before taking on the responsibilities of parenthood. The pattern of dismissal that would later define my family's response to my deepest pain began almost immediately after our pregnancy announcement, disguised as helpful concern and loving guidance that somehow managed to undermine my confidence while appearing supportive. Within days of sharing our news, my mother called with a list of suggestions that felt more like requirements, practical advice delivered with the kind of authority that brooked no disagreement or alternative perspectives. "Sarah, honey," she said during one of these calls, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she believed she was being especially helpful. "I've been thinking about your situation, and there are so many things you need to consider. First, that little house of yours simply isn't suitable for a baby. The rooms are too small, there's no proper nursery space, and with Marcus's tools and projects everywhere, it's not exactly child-safe." Her words painted our home as inadequate and dangerous, transforming the cozy bungalow we'd lovingly restored into a hazardous environment unfit for raising children. She continued without pausing for my response, as if my opinion about my own living situation was irrelevant to the discussion. "Your father and I have been talking, and we think you should seriously consider moving closer to us, maybe into one of those new developments near Rebecca's neighborhood. The schools are better, the houses are designed for families, and you'd have built-in support from your sister who's already been through all this." The assumption that Rebecca's proximity would be beneficial rather than stressful revealed how little my mother understood the dynamics between her daughters. When I tried to explain that Marcus and I loved our house and had already begun planning how to convert the spare room into a nursery, my mother's response was a dismissive laugh that stung more than outright criticism. "Oh, sweetheart, you'll understand when the baby comes how impractical all those romantic notions are. Babies need space, proper facilities, safe neighborhoods. You can't just paint a room and call it a nursery." Her words reduced our careful planning and excited preparations to naive fantasies, as if our vision for our family's future was inherently unrealistic. Rebecca took a different but equally undermining approach, positioning herself as the experienced mother whose guidance was essential for my success in this new role. She began dropping by unannounced, ostensibly to check on how I was feeling, but actually to conduct informal inspections of our preparedness for parenthood. During these visits, she would walk through our house with the critical eye of someone cataloging deficiencies, making mental notes about everything we lacked and needed to acquire. "You know," she said during one particularly memorable visit, standing in our planned nursery space with her arms crossed and her expression skeptical, "when I was pregnant with Emma, Brad and I spent months researching the best cribs, the safest car seats, the most educational toys. We wanted everything to be perfect because you only get one chance to give your child the best possible start in life." Her implication was clear. Anything less than her level of preparation constituted parental negligence. She would then launch into detailed descriptions of the extensive preparations she and Brad had made before each of their children was born. The thousands of dollars they'd spent on equipment and furniture, the careful research they'd conducted to ensure every purchase met the highest safety standards. These stories weren't shared as helpful guidance, but as evidence of the proper way to prepare for parenthood, a standard against which our more modest preparations would inevitably fall short. The baby registry became another battleground where My family's expectations clashed with our reality and preferences. Rebecca insisted on taking me shopping for baby items, an expedition that turned into a comprehensive education about everything we were doing wrong. At the upscale baby boutique she'd chosen, she guided me through displays of furniture and equipment. That cost more than Marcus made in a month, explaining why each expensive item was essential for proper child care. "This crib is the safest model available," she announced, running her hand along the rail of a piece that cost nearly $2,000. "It's what all the best parents choose because it converts into a toddler bed and then a full-size bed. So it's really an investment in your child's future." When I mentioned that Marcus had offered to build a crib himself, using plans he'd found and skills he'd developed through years of carpentry work, Rebecca's expression shifted to barely concealed horror. "Sarah, you can't be serious," she said, her voice dropping to the kind of whisper usually reserved for discussing family scandals. "A homemade crib? Do you have any idea how many safety regulations commercial cribs have to meet? How much testing goes into ensuring they're safe for babies? You're talking about risking your child's life to save a few $100s. Her words transformed Marcus's loving offer to create something beautiful and personal for our baby into an act of dangerous negligence. Daniel's contribution to this campaign of undermining came in the form of financial lectures disguised as brotherly concern, conversations about the reality of raising children that always seemed to highlight our inadequate preparation for the costs involved. He would corner Marcus at family gatherings, pulling him aside for man-to-man discussions about the importance of providing properly for a family. Conversations that left my husband feeling diminished and defensive. "Kids are expensive, Marcus," Daniel would say with the authority of someone who'd already navigated these challenges successfully. "I mean really expensive. Emma's dance classes alone cost more per month than most people spend on groceries. And that's just the beginning. You've got daycare, medical expenses, clothes they outgrow every few months, college funds to start. Have you guys really thought about how you're going to handle all of that?" His questions weren't genuine inquiries, but challenges designed to highlight our financial limitations. When Marcus would mention that we'd been saving money and felt confident about our ability to provide for our child, Daniel's response was always the same patronizing smile accompanied by warnings about how naive we were being. That's what Amanda and I thought too, before we really understood what we were getting into. Thank God I'd already established my business and we had some financial cushion, because otherwise we would have been in real trouble. You might want to think about taking on some additional work, maybe expanding beyond just construction into something more stable and lucrative. These conversations invariably included suggestions about opportunities Daniel could provide, ways Marcus could earn extra money by working on projects for Daniel's friends and business associates. The offers were presented as generous assistance, but they came with implicit acknowledgments that Marcus's current work wasn't sufficient for supporting a family properly. Every suggestion reinforced the message that we were unprepared and would need help from more successful family members to manage the responsibilities of parenthood. My father's participation in this pattern was more subtle but equally damaging, expressed through concerns about my health and well-being that somehow always circled back to questions about our readiness for parenthood. During my pregnancy, he would ask about my doctor's appointments with an intensity that felt more invasive than caring, wanting details about test results and recommendations that seemed designed to identify potential problems rather than celebrate progress. "How's Dr. Patterson treating you?" he would ask during our weekly phone calls, his voice carrying undertones of worry that made me anxious even when everything was progressing normally. "Is he keeping a close eye on everything? I know. You had some trouble getting pregnant, so I hope he's being extra careful to make sure there are no complications." His constant focus on potential problems transformed my pregnancy from a joyful experience into a medical situation requiring constant vigilance and professional intervention. When I would reassure him that everything was going well, that my appointments were routine and positive, he would nod thoughtfully before launching into stories about other women he'd known who'd had difficulties during pregnancy or childbirth. These cautionary tales weren't malicious, but they created an atmosphere of anxiety and fear that poisoned my ability to enjoy this long-awaited experience. Every twinge or discomfort became potentially significant. Every normal pregnancy symptom, a possible sign of serious problems. The most insidious aspect of this pattern was how it masqueraded as love and support while systematically undermining my confidence in every aspect of my preparation for motherhood. My family genuinely believed they were helping, protecting me from naive mistakes and unrealistic expectations by pointing out all the ways Marcus and I were falling short of proper standards. Their intentions were loving, even as their actions were destructive, creating a toxic environment where their concern felt more threatening than supportive. Amanda joined this chorus of helpful concern with observations about my appearance and behavior during pregnancy that somehow always included comparisons to her own experience or suggestions for improvement. "You look tired, Sarah," she would say with sympathetic concern during family gatherings. "Are you getting enough rest? When I was pregnant with the boys, Daniel made sure I could nap every afternoon because he understood how important sleep was for the baby's development. Maybe Marcus needs to take on more of the household responsibilities so you can focus on staying healthy." These comments positioned Marcus as insufficiently attentive to my needs while suggesting that my tiredness was evidence of poor self-care rather than normal pregnancy fatigue. When I would explain that Marcus was actually very helpful and that I felt fine most of the time, Amanda would nod knowingly as if I was being naive about my own situation. "Oh, honey, you don't want to admit when you need help, but pregnancy is serious business. You have to put the baby's needs first, even if that means asking for more support than you're comfortable with." The cumulative effect of these constant critiques and suggestions was to transform my pregnancy from a celebrated milestone into a test I was failing, a challenge for which I was inadequately prepared despite months of careful planning and excited anticipation. Every family interaction became an opportunity for someone to identify another area where Marcus and I were falling short, another aspect of parenthood we hadn't considered properly, another way our approach differed from the approved family standards. By the time I reached my second trimester, family gatherings had become exercises in defensive justification rather than celebrations of our growing family. I found myself preparing responses to anticipated criticisms, rehearsing explanations for our choices, and dreading conversations that should have been sources of joy and support. The pregnancy that should have brought me closer to my family instead highlighted every way I differed from their expectations and values. The irony was devastating. The very people who should have been my strongest supporters during this vulnerable time had become sources of stress and insecurity, their love expressed through criticism that made me question decisions I'd been confident about. Their pattern of well-meaning dismissal was already established when tragedy struck, creating the foundation for the cruel indifference that would follow when I needed their support most desperately. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in late February, delivered to my parents' house with the kind of formal elegance that Rebecca had perfected for all her major life events. The cream-colored envelope bore my cousin Jessica's name. In flowing script and inside was an announcement that would unknowingly become the stage for the most devastating confrontation of my life. Jessica Morrison, my Aunt Linda's daughter and Rebecca's closest cousin, was getting married to her longtime boyfriend, David Chen, in what promised to be the social event of the season in Cedar Falls. Jessica had always been Rebecca's kindred spirit, another Mitchell family member who understood the importance of appearances and social positioning. She worked as a marketing coordinator for a large firm in Des Moines, lived in a trendy downtown loft, and had maintained a carefully curated social media presence that documented her picture-perfect relationship with David, a software engineer who shared her ambitions and aesthetic sensibilities. Their engagement had been the kind of Instagram-worthy proposal that generated hundreds of likes and congratulatory comments, complete with professional photography and a romantic sunset backdrop. The wedding was scheduled for March 15th, a date that seemed perfectly chosen for a spring celebration when the weather would be mild and the flowers would be beginning to bloom. Rebecca had immediately volunteered to host the engagement party, seeing an opportunity to showcase her entertaining skills and demonstrate the kind of sophisticated hospitality that had become her signature. The party would be held at her house in early March, giving her several weeks to plan an event that would reflect well on the entire family while celebrating Jessica's happiness. When my mother called to discuss the engagement party plans, her excitement was infectious and genuine. "Rebecca has such wonderful ideas," she gushed, clearly delighted to have another opportunity to celebrate a family milestone. "She's thinking of a garden party theme with lights strung through the trees and elegant appetizers served on the deck. Jessica will love it, and it'll be such a lovely way to welcome David into the family properly." The enthusiasm in her voice made it clear that this event was already being viewed as a significant family celebration. Rebecca's planning process began immediately, with phone calls and meetings that transformed the simple concept of an engagement party into an elaborate production requiring weeks of preparation and significant financial investment. She researched caterers, florists, and rental companies with the thoroughness of someone planning a major corporate event, determined to create an experience that would be remembered and discussed long after the last guest went home. Every detail was carefully considered, from the color scheme that would complement her garden to the menu that would appeal to guests with varying dietary preferences. During family dinners, Rebecca would update everyone on her progress, sharing photos of flower arrangements she was considering and describing the elaborate appetizer menu she'd designed with her chosen caterer. Her excitement was genuine and contagious, transforming our weekly gatherings into planning sessions where everyone contributed suggestions and offered assistance with various aspects of the preparation. My parents were clearly proud of Rebecca's commitment to making Jessica's celebration special, and even Daniel volunteered to help with setup and logistics. The irony of the timing wasn't lost on me, though I kept my observations to myself during these planning discussions. March 15th, the date chosen for Jessica's engagement party, was also my due date. The day Marcus and I had circled on our calendar with excitement and anticipation for months. While my family planned a celebration of Jessica's future happiness, I was preparing for the arrival of the baby we'd waited so long to meet. The convergence of these two significant events felt meaningful, as if the universe was aligning to make this spring a season of new beginnings for our entire family. I mentioned the coincidence to Rebecca during one of our conversations about the party, thinking she might find it interesting or even touching that Jessica's celebration and my baby's arrival were scheduled for the same day. Her response was characteristically practical and slightly dismissive, focused more on the logistics of potentially having to adjust party plans than on the significance of the timing. "Well, hopefully your baby will be on time or even a little late," she said with a laugh. "It would be such a shame if you had to miss Jessica's party because you were in the hospital having a baby." The casual way she prioritized the party over my child's birth was typical of Rebecca's perspective, but it stung nonetheless. When I suggested that maybe the timing was actually perfect, that we could celebrate both events together and make the day even more special for our family, Rebecca's expression shifted to barely concealed horror. "Oh, Sarah, you can't be serious. Jessica's engagement party isn't the place for baby announcements or birth updates. This is her special day, and she deserves to have all the attention focused on her and David." Her response revealed the fundamental difference in how we viewed family celebrations and shared milestones. For Rebecca, events were carefully orchestrated, productions where attention and focus had to be managed and controlled to ensure the proper people received the appropriate recognition. The idea of spontaneous joy or unplanned celebrations that might compete with her carefully designed experience was threatening to her vision of how things should proceed. My mother's reaction to the timing coincidence was more diplomatic, but equally telling. When I mentioned during Sunday dinner that my due date was the same as Jessica's party, she nodded thoughtfully before launching into a discussion of contingency plans that revealed her priorities. "Well, we'll just have to hope everything works out smoothly," she said with the kind of forced optimism that indicated she was already worried about potential complications. If you do go into labor that day, Marcus can take you to the hospital, while the rest of us handle the party. That way everyone's needs can be met without disrupting Jessica's celebration. The assumption that my labor and delivery could be neatly compartmentalized away from family activities while they continued, with their planned celebration, felt cold and dismissive, even though I understood the practical considerations involved. But there was something deeper in my mother's response that troubled me, an indication that Jessica's engagement party was viewed as more important to the family's social obligations than my personal medical experience, even though both events marked significant family milestones. Daniel's perspective on the timing was characteristically focused on practical concerns and worst-case scenarios that somehow always seemed to highlight potential problems rather than celebrate positive possibilities. "You better make sure you have all your hospital arrangements sorted out well in advance," he advised during one of our conversations. "The last thing you want is to be scrambling around trying to find childcare or transportation while everyone else is trying to get ready for an important family event. Maybe you should pack your hospital bag early and have backup plans in place so you don't disrupt everything if labor starts at an inconvenient time." His advice was probably well-intentioned, but the framing was telling. My labor was positioned as a potential disruption to more important family activities rather than an event that might naturally take precedence over social obligations. The suggestion that I needed backup plans to avoid inconveniencing others during childbirth revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of how family priorities should be arranged during major life events. Amanda's contribution to these discussions was even more problematic, focused on her own experiences and opinions about proper timing and preparation that somehow always managed to highlight ways I was approaching things incorrectly. "When I was pregnant with the twins, I was so organized that I had everything ready by 36 weeks, she said with the kind of pride that suggested superior planning skills. "I knew exactly when I wanted to go into labor, and I did everything I could to encourage it to happen on schedule. You really should be doing more to ensure your baby comes when it's convenient for everyone." The implication that I could somehow control the timing of labor through better preparation was both medically ridiculous and emotionally insulting. But Amanda delivered this advice with the confidence of someone who genuinely believed her superior. Planning had resulted in more convenient births. When I tried to explain that labor typically begins when babies are ready rather than according to social calendars, she nodded knowingly, as if I was being naive about the degree of control expectant mothers could exercise over their delivery timing. The planning meetings for Jessica's engagement party became increasingly elaborate as the date approached, with Rebecca organizing multiple shopping trips and coordination sessions that consumed most of her free time and energy. She recruited my mother as her primary assistant, and together they devoted hours to selecting decorations, arranging flowers, and coordinating details that would create the perfect atmosphere for celebrating Jessica's happiness. Their dedication to creating a flawless event was admirable and touching, evidence of how much they cared about making Jessica feel special and loved. But as my due date approached and coincided more obviously with the party date, I began to feel increasingly invisible in these family discussions. Conversations that should have included excitement about my approaching labor and delivery were dominated by party planning logistics and concerns about how various scenarios might affect the celebration. When I tried to contribute to discussions about timing and coordination, my input was politely acknowledged and then set aside in favor of more pressing party-related concerns. The week before the party, Rebecca called to finalize arrangements and address last-minute details that required family coordination. During this conversation, she mentioned almost casually that she hoped I would still be able to help with setup and coordination, even if I was feeling uncomfortable or anxious about my approaching due date. "I know you're probably feeling pretty heavy and tired at this point," she said with sympathetic understanding. "But I'm really counting on your help to make sure everything goes smoothly. You're so good at organizing details and managing logistics." Her request for help was flattering and indicated that she valued my contributions, but there was something troubling about the assumption that my availability was guaranteed regardless of my physical condition or the proximity of my due date. When I gently mentioned that I might not be able to commit to specific responsibilities given the uncertainty of labor timing, Rebecca's response was a nervous laugh, followed by reassurances that surely everything would work out fine and that I was probably worrying unnecessarily about timing conflicts. The final planning meeting took place 3 days before the party, and by that point, my discomfort was obvious and my energy was limited. Sitting in Rebecca's living room while she reviewed final details and assignments, I felt like a spectator at my own family's activities, rather than a participant whose own major life event was imminent. The conversation swirled around me, focused on flower arrangements and catering schedules and guest coordination, while I struggled with lower back pain and the physical exhaustion that had become constant during my final weeks of pregnancy. When the meeting concluded and everyone began to leave, my mother pulled me aside for a private conversation that I hoped would acknowledge the significance of my approaching delivery and offer support for whatever might happen over the next few days. Instead, she focused on practical arrangements and contingency plans that positioned my labor as a logistical challenge to be managed rather than a joyful family milestone to be celebrated alongside Jessica's engagement. The morning of March 15th dawned gray and cold, with the kind of persistent drizzle that made everything look muted and somber. I woke before my alarm, pulled from sleep by cramping that felt different from the usual late pregnancy discomfort I'd grown accustomed to over the past few weeks. Marcus was already gone, having left early for a job site across town, but he'd left a note on my pillow wishing me a happy due date and promising to keep his phone close in case anything happened. The cramping intensified as I moved around the house, trying to complete the morning routine that had become increasingly difficult as my pregnancy progressed. Each wave of pain was stronger than the last, accompanied by a deep ache in my lower back that made it hard to stand upright for more than a few minutes. I called Dr. Patterson's office, speaking to the nurse who had become familiar with my anxious questions over the past few months, describing the symptoms that seemed to indicate labor was beginning. "It sounds like this might be the real thing, Sarah," she said with professional calm that somehow made the reality of the situation feel both more real and more frightening. "Why don't you time the contractions for the next hour and call back? If they're getting stronger and closer together? If this is active labor, you'll want to head to the hospital soon." Her matter-of-fact tone contrasted sharply with the emotion and excitement I felt at the prospect that this long-awaited day had finally arrived. I called Marcus immediately, reaching him just as he was unloading tools from his truck at the construction site. The joy in his voice when I explained what was happening made tears spring to my eyes, and I could hear him telling his coworkers that he had to leave because his wife was in labor. "I'll be home in 20 minutes, he promised, his voice thick with excitement and barely controlled panic. "Don't do anything. Don't go anywhere. Just wait for me and we'll go to the hospital together." The next call should have been to my mother, sharing the news that her grandchild was finally ready to make an appearance on the exact day we'd all been anticipating for months. I dialed her number with shaking fingers, expecting to hear excitement and offers of support, ready to share this momentous experience with the family who had been part of our journey from the beginning. When she answered, I could hear background, noise and voices, the sounds of people moving around and preparing for some kind of event. "Mom," I said, my voice breathless from another contraction. "I think I'm in labor. The cramping started this morning and it's getting stronger. Marcus is coming home and we're going to head to the hospital soon." I expected immediate attention, concerned questions about my condition, offers to meet us at the hospital or help with arrangements. Instead, there was a brief pause, followed by a distracted response that made my heart sink. "Oh, honey, are you sure it's really labor?" First babies are usually late, and today is Jessica's engagement party. I'm at Rebecca's house helping with the setup, and we've got so much to do before guests arrive. Her tone was harried and impatient, focused on the logistics of party preparation rather than the significance of what I was telling her. Maybe You should wait a few hours and see if the contractions get worse before you assume it's the real thing. The casual dismissal of my labor as potentially inconvenient timing for Jessica's party hit me like a physical blow. I tried to explain that the contractions were definitely real and getting stronger, that Dr. Patterson's nurse had confirmed this was likely active labor, but my mother's attention was clearly divided between our conversation and whatever preparations were happening around her. Well, if you're really sure it's happening, I suppose Marcus can take you to the hospital and call us with updates, she said with resignation rather than excitement. We'll be tied up with the party most of the evening, but someone can check their phone periodically to see how you're doing. Hopefully everything goes quickly and smoothly so we don't have to worry about you while we're trying to focus on Jessica's celebration. The pain of her response was worse than the physical contractions that were now coming every few minutes. My mother, who should have been rushing to support me during one of the most important moments of my life, was treating my labor as an inconvenience that might interfere with a party. When I suggested that maybe someone could come to the hospital to be with Marcus and me, her response was a nervous laugh that indicated how unreasonable she thought my request was. "Sarah, sweetheart, we can't just abandon Jessica's party because you're having a baby. This celebration has been planned for weeks, and everyone is expecting us to be here. Your sister has worked so hard to make everything perfect, and it would be devastating if family members started disappearing right before guests arrived." Her explanation made it clear that Jessica's engagement party was considered more important than my child's birth, a priority that superseded even the most significant family milestones. I called Rebecca next, hoping my sister might have a different perspective on the timing or at least offer some acknowledgement that my labor was more significant than party preparations. When she answered, her voice was breathless with excitement and stress, clearly in the middle of final preparations that had consumed her attention completely. "Rebecca, I'm in labor," I said simply, hoping the directness would cut through whatever distractions were surrounding her. "The baby is coming today, and Marcus and I are getting ready to go to the hospital." I expected surprise, concern, offers of support, or at least recognition that this news should take precedence over whatever she was doing. Instead, her response was frustrated irritation that barely concealed her annoyance at this inconvenient development. "Today? Really? You couldn't hold off for just one more day until after Jessica's party?" Her tone suggested that my labor was a personal choice I was making, rather than a natural process beyond my control. "This is going to completely ruin the atmosphere if people start getting phone calls about you being in the hospital while we're trying to celebrate Jessica and David." When I tried to explain that I couldn't control when labor started, that babies came when they were ready regardless of social calendars, Rebecca's response was a heavy sigh, followed by practical instructions that prioritized the party over my medical situation. "Well, I guess Marcus will have to handle everything himself, because there's no way any of us can leave right now. Make sure you tell him not to call here during the party with updates unless it's a real emergency. We need to keep everyone focused on celebrating Jessica." The conversation with Daniel was equally devastating, though his response took the form of practical concerns about timing and logistics rather than outright dismissal. When I called to let him know what was happening, his first question wasn't about my condition or well-being, but about whether this would affect his ability to attend. "Jessica's party is planned. Are you sure you can't wait until tomorrow?" he asked with the kind of serious tone usually reserved for discussing business emergencies. "I mean, labor can take hours, right? Maybe if you just stay home and rest for a while, things will calm down and you can deliver after the weekend when it's more convenient for everyone." His suggestion that I could somehow postpone active labor to accommodate social commitments revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of both childbirth and family priorities. When I explained that labor doesn't work that way, that the baby would come when it was ready regardless of anyone's convenience, Daniel's response focused on contingency plans that positioned my medical emergency as a logistical problem requiring management. "Okay, well, make sure Marcus has all the hospital information and insurance cards, and tell him to only call with updates if something goes seriously wrong." The rest of us need to focus on making Jessica's party special, and we can't be distracted by hospital drama unless it's absolutely necessary. The phrase hospital drama to describe the birth of their nephew or niece crystallized everything. That was wrong with my family's response to this situation. My labor, the arrival of the first grandchild my parents had been anticipating for months, was being framed as an inconvenience that threatened to disrupt more important social obligations. By the time Marcus arrived home, I was crying harder, from emotional pain than physical discomfort, devastated by my family's response to what should have been one of the most celebrated moments in our lives. He found me sitting on our bedroom floor, clutching the phone and sobbing as another contraction washed over me. When I explained what my family had said, his face went through a series of expressions that ended with anger I'd rarely seen from him. "They said what?" he asked, his voice tight with disbelief and fury. "Your mother told you not to bother them during your labor because of a party?" When I nodded, unable to speak through another wave of pain and emotion, Marcus knelt beside me and pulled me into his arms with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the hardness in his voice. "Sarah, listen to me. Those people don't deserve to be part of this moment. This is about us, about our baby, about our family. They can choose to miss it for a party, but we're not going to let their selfishness ruin the most important day of our lives." The drive to Cedar Falls General Hospital was quiet, except for my breathing through contractions and Marcus's occasional murmured words of encouragement. As we pulled into the parking lot, I realized that we were facing this monumental experience alone, without the family support system I'd always assumed would be part of bringing our child into the world. The isolation was crushing, but Marcus's steady presence beside me provided the only comfort I needed. The labor progressed quickly once we arrived at the hospital, leaving little time for the drawn-out experience I'd expected based on stories from friends and family members. Within hours, I was holding our daughter, a perfect little girl with Marcus's dark eyes and my stubborn chin, examining her tiny fingers and toes while tears of joy and grief streamed down my face. She was beautiful, healthy, and absolutely perfect, everything we'd dreamed about during the years of trying and months of waiting. Marcus called his mother in Chicago first, sharing the news with someone who responded with the joy and excitement that should have come from my own family. Then he called my parents' house, reaching my father, who was apparently staying home from the party due to a headache. Dad's response was warm and congratulatory, but when Marcus asked if he wanted to come to the hospital to meet his granddaughter, the answer revealed the family's priorities. "I'd love to, son, but Patricia and the others are at Jessica's party, and I should probably stay here in case they need anything," he said with genuine regret in his voice. "Maybe tomorrow would be better, when things have settled down and everyone can visit properly." Even my father, who had seemed most likely to prioritize family over social obligations, was choosing to accommodate the party rather than welcome his first grandchild. We spent that first night alone in the hospital room, just the three of us, beginning our life as a family without the celebration and support I'd imagined would mark this transition. Marcus slept fitfully in the uncomfortable chair beside my bed, while I held our daughter and tried to process the devastating realization that my family had chosen a party over the birth of their grandchild, niece, and great-niece. The next morning brought flowers and congratulations from Marcus's family and friends, but silence from my own relatives who were apparently sleeping off Jessica's engagement party. When my mother finally called late that afternoon, her first words weren't about the baby or my condition, but about the success of the previous evening's celebration. "The party was absolutely beautiful, Sarah. Jessica looked radiant, and everyone had such a wonderful time. Rebecca outdid herself with the decorations and food." Only after describing the party in detail did she ask about the baby, and even then her questions felt perfunctory rather than genuinely interested. "So how did everything go? Is the baby healthy? When can we come visit?" The casual tone of her inquiry, as if my labor and delivery were minor events that ranked below party planning in importance, completed the devastation that had begun with her initial response to my phone call. My daughter's birth, the moment that should have brought our family together in celebration and joy, had instead revealed the shallow priorities and cruel indifference that lay beneath their surface expressions of love and support. That's when I knew exactly what I had to do. My family had made their choice clear. Social appearances mattered more than genuine milestones, parties were more important than people, and their love came with conditions that I would never be able to meet. But I wasn't going to let their indifference define my daughter's place in this family, and I wasn't going to pretend that their behavior was acceptable or forgivable. The box I would send them would contain more than just objects. It would hold the weight of every dismissed moment, every prioritized party, every time they had chosen appearances over authenticity. And when they opened it, they would finally understand that some choices have consequences, some indifference demands accountability, and some truths are too powerful to be ignored. If this story resonates with your own experiences of being overlooked or dismissed by the people who should support you most, I want to hear about it in the comments below. Sometimes the most profound lessons come from the deepest pain, and sharing our stories helps us heal while helping others feel less alone. Don't forget to subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength in the face of family betrayal and discovering that our chosen families can be more powerful than the ones we're born into.